Welcome to Loyola Marymount University. I'm Fernando Guerra, professor and director of the Center for the Study of Los Angeles. Today we're going to be talking about what is an Angeleno, who is an Angeleno, and how do Angelenos think. We have three great guests that I'm very fortunate to welcome to Loyola Marymount. Sandy Banks. She is the LA Times columnist. She is originally from Cleveland, but like anybody from Cleveland wants to come to LA. She resides in Northridge, California, and she has worked at the LA Times for more than 30 years. I've been at LMU for more than 30 years, and I've been reading her stuff for more than 30 years. And she has been a reporter, editor, editorial writer. And we see her column two or three times, two times a week. I never miss it. It's an awesome column that you need to read, and I know most of the students here probably read it online. Right next to me is Luis Rodriguez. He's the Los Angeles Poet Laureate and author. He was appointed by Mayor Garcetti as the official Poet Laureate for the next 2 years in Los Angeles. He's from El Paso, and like almost everybody that I know from El Paso, they all live in Los Angeles. His family relocated to South LA when he was 2. He was an active gang member by the time he was 11 years old, and his award-winning book, Always Running, La Vida Loca, Gang Days in LA, he talks about that time in his life. He also ran for governor in 2014 as the Green Party endorsee. And most recently, as I mentioned, he was selected as LA's Poet Laureate by Mayor Garcetti. Also with us is Don Waldie. You oftentimes see his name as DJ Waldie and the things that he writes. He is a Los Angeles native. He specializes in LA history, politics, and culture. Before publishing his critically received works, he was a professor of comparative literature at Cal State Long Beach, as well as the deputy city manager of the city of Lakewood, where he was born and still lives. His focus is on social development, urbanism, and politics, and has been regarded as one of the most comprehensive accounts of LA history. His works include Holy Land, a suburban memoir, Where We Are Now, and California Romantica. So the three of you, welcome. We really appreciate you coming to LMU and to talk to us and to enlighten us. I'm a social scientist. I do a lot of surveys and I get a lot of hard numbers. And I was always, and we have a small packet that we've passed out to the students. And in that, we have a question where we ask people, do you consider yourself an Angeleno? And given how many people in LA are from Cleveland, El Paso, places
or
like,
Lakewood,
or Lakewood, the number was pretty high. And even people who live in LA County and don't live in the city, because I always think that there's a great divide between county residents and LA. I always think of LA City as the big behemoth that they try to take advantage of everything. But most people in LA County consider themselves Angeleno. How do you consider yourself an Angeleno? What does that word mean to you? And are you, was it elicit in you when you think about being an Angeleno?
Well, it does, but I always start from the perspective of being a Chicano, and then I feel that it's natural to be an Angeleno when you're Chicano. And I'll tell you a couple of stories that might give you a reason why. One is I met with somebody from the California Historical Society, and they wanted to talk about including more people because it's generally about white history, So, and she says, well, we want to do with the Mexican community. We want to start when the Spanish came. And I says, don't start with the Spanish came. We have indigenous ties. Our ties go as deep as anybody's. And that's hard for people to understand, that Chicanos and Mexicans are indigenous people to this land. Because the general idea, even in LA, is that we're foreigners. We come from another country, that we're illegals, that we don't belong here, that we're the strangers. And I remember when I came back, I was living in Chicago 15 years. I came back, and the first thing that happened...
What took you to Chicago?
Writing, getting involved in...
You can write in L.A.
Yeah, no.
I guess it's easier to write in Chicago because it's always cold and you have to stay indoors.
Yeah, but also because Chicago is a very vibrant city. Besides the code, it's had started the poetry slams there, and I participated, and it's just a great city. But what happened, I came back and I was in the valley, and somebody drove by, and somebody yelled out, "Go back to where you came from." I call them drive-by epithets. People do this every once in a while. And I really thought, well, everything's turned on its head now. Now the brown-skinned people who are native are where the people that don't belong. So I affirm, and I told this lady from the Historical Society, we've been here as long as anybody. People don't know that a lot of Native peoples in California intermarried and mixed with Mexicans that came, natives from Mexico, that there wasn't a lot of the Spanish. The Spanish were actually small in number,
Right.
actual Spanish. They brought in Africans, they brought in Chinese, and they brought in all these Native peoples. And we've been that way ever since. I tell people one time we had a Native American conference in East LA, and they had Lakotas and Navajos, a bunch of people. And I said, now you're in the largest Native community in the country. What? East LA. Yeah. Of course, it's the largest Native community. So I want to go back to that. To me, my Angeleno roots go as deep as anybody's, and yet it also is relatively new and interesting and different, because not only are Chicanos here, we got Salvadorians, we got Guatemaltecos, Hondureños, we got people from all over the world. So now we got 240 languages, so now we have to mix with who we know with all this great, I think, great flavors and colors coming into the city. So I feel Angeleno makes that real for me, that this is a place for all these people.
Sandy, Angeleno, what does it mean to you?
Well, I have to say, I was surprised when I got asked to be here and be an Angeleno, because honestly, I grew up in Cleveland. I came here in '79, so I've been here longer than I was in Cleveland, but I still really think of myself as a Clevelander. And when I get ready to go back, I say I'm going home. And this has made me think a lot about that, about am I an Angeleno or am I an imposter up here?
Wow, so 30
But-
years and you're still struggling with
I'm
being an
still-
imposter.
Right, I still really feel, I feel like, and my children are Angelenos, but I feel like kind of a guest here. But I have, a story that kind of goes along with what you said, Luis. When we first moved here, we moved here because I got a job at the Times and because we'd had a really, really cold winter in Cleveland, and that was enough. And so my husband and I just came out and applied for jobs everywhere, and I got hired here. And they moved us out and put us in an apartment in Encino. And it was fascinating to me because in Cleveland, you had black people and you had white people. And there was a river that went down the middle of the city that divided the city. So you could grow up and spend your whole life there and only know people that look like you. And we moved into this really great apartment building, and it had people, made friends with people from New Jersey and Iowa and Minnesota.
Bunch of foreigners.
And then also from South Africa and Trinidad and Belize and, and Mexico and all over. And we thought, boy, this is it. We are in nirvana. And then we started looking for a place to live, and we realized that there was still racism, and we'd call about a nice apartment, and we'd come over, and it would suddenly have been rented when they saw us. And so we said, okay, so we really haven't advanced any by being here. And then an interesting thing happened. We went to look at one apartment building, and the lady was very happy to see us and showed us around. And she said, I think you'll like it here because we don't have a lot of Mexicans. And we had to look at each other and wonder, now, what did that mean? Because all we knew was the people that we'd been in our apartment who were perfectly nice. And we realized then that there was a different kind of segregation and of division here. And it wasn't so overt. And people did kind of, see each other and pass, but that there were still a hierarchy. There was a hierarchy of people. And you still hear it when you hear people say, oh, yes, I'm a sixth-generation Californian. There is still a hierarchy here. And it's been an interesting place to navigate for us. And I still think its blessings are much, much, many more than the disadvantages. But I don't know yet if I'm an Angeleno. I live in the Valley. I don't know if what that makes me. So.
Foreigner.
Yeah. And remember, the Valley tried to secede, not so long ago.
That's
So-
right. Don?
Well, although I was described a few moments ago as being an Angeleno, I'm not really an Angeleno. I don't live in the city of Los Angeles. I don't live in the corporate limits of that weirdly shaped thing that I doubt if anyone in the audience could draw the boundaries of the city of Los Angeles from memory, or put in it all the little bits that are not the city of Los Angeles, like Santa
That's
Monica.
for my LA politics class, that will be on the midterm for you to draw the boundaries. And you're going to have to thank Mr. Waldie for that.
It kind of looks like a squashed brain with a long spinal cord. It does. With inclusions like Beverly Hills and Santa Monica and a few other places, Culver City and the like. So I am not a citizen of Los Angeles, but I am a resident of that larger thing called LA, which is not exactly coterminous with the county of Los Angeles. It kind of laps over in different directions, and it doesn't necessarily go all the way out to the high desert. I don't think people who live in Gorman think of themselves as being Angelenos, but they might, I don't know. And as a resident of that big thing called LA, I claim the title proudly of Angeleno. Because if I'm not really an Angeleno by birth or locality, I'm an Angeleno by desire. And desire has shaped a great deal of how this place interprets itself to itself. And I struggle with how desire is worked out in Los Angeles over the 200 and some years that we've been struggling to find our way here, to find our home here. So I am an Angeleno by desire, and I recognize that that puts me in an odd position with other stuff because there are so many other ways of defining who we are other than Angeleno. There are racial and ethnic divisions that we could talk about. There are class divisions that separate us. What troubles me as a writer about Los Angeles, a writer about what it means to be an Angeleno, is what kind of imagination can we create collectively, if we can, that would amalgamate into to some degree, what sort of imagination would be sufficiently large to cover all of those divisions. The divisions actually that have been built into the landscape since the beginning, since at least the arrival of Europeans in 1781 to this location. So I am, what being an Angeleno means to me is desire.
Luis, at what point do you think that, well, let me, in this data that we presented, it's very interesting. Latinos, to a greater degree than other groups, consider themselves Angeleno. And amongst those, foreign-born or immigrants consider themselves Angelenos, more so than native-born Latinos. But I have a sense that at some point in our recent past, we crossed a threshold where even though there's still discrimination, segregation, et cetera, that this is a Latino town and people feel comfortable with it. As a matter of fact, I'm willing to claim on this show the end of white flight, that whites were leaving LA. By the way, what is the second largest white city in America? It is Los Angeles. Only New York has more white people living in that city than LA. There's over 1.2 million whites that live in Los Angeles. And the numbers have stopped decreasing. And I expect, in terms of forecasting the demography of Los Angeles, that there will always be over 1 million whites in LA. That will never drop below that. Okay, you start to see the trends right now. And so people are becoming comfortable. But also the whites that are here in LA, I think, are very different in many respects than the ones in the 1950s. But back to do you agree with me that there's at some point where people are very comfortable calling this a Latino city, whether you're Latino or not? In your experience, has that happened?
Well, I think there's a big divide, and I think there's people that live in LA don't even know about the Latino population, they'll eat
Well, that's
pollo
Hollywood.
loco. They'll eat pollo loco, but they don't really know, and yet there's people, they just don't. But then there's people that see it all Mexicans.
But they pronounce it correctly, pollo loco. They don't say polo loco.
But I think the issue to me is that we're actually losing not so many Latinos, but we are losing people of color. There is, and that's some statistically that could be seen. We lost actually more African Americans than ever before. They're being pushed out. They're now in the deserts. They're now in Palmdale and Lancaster. They're being pushed out. A lot of the poor people from East LA, Highland Park, their article about Highland Park. The gentrification, the white flight is not happening, but there is white.
Well, part of it
big
is
money.
yeah, correct.
And I'm talking about money white. I'm talking about
Downtown
poor
LA is a
white.
great
Yeah,
example,
so
yeah.
I think there is a problem with that. I do feel though that being Latino, LA makes the Latino makes LA a very distinctive city. And I'll give you an example. I was in New York City. I have a poem about this, kind of long, but I could tell that this guy was homeless, and he was in Washington Square Park, and I can tell he was from East LA because you cannot. So distinguishable. You cannot mistake a guy from East LA. He was standing there, and I go, this guy's out of place. He's in New York City, and it doesn't make sense, but he was in New York City, and I spotted him a mile away, and we ended up talking, and the poem is called Animal in Washington Square Park, because he used to be a boxer, famous boxer named Ernie Lopez, and he was there with his tattoos, and these are LA tattoos. They're not anywhere else. You know what I'm saying? You can tell that there's an LA culture that Chicanos, Mexicanos, and other Latinos have created that makes it very distinctive, even the way people talk. Because back east, people talk about how they talk differently, but LA also has a special talk, but it's very prominent among Latinos more than anybody else.
But do you consider LA a Latino city?
Well, partly because it's
A Mexican city, Chicano
it's the
city?
third largest Mexican city in the world. People don't know that, and I think that people come here thinking this is a Latino city. They come here knowing they're going to come to a Latino city. It's like if you think about Miami, the Cuban population is actually smaller than ours, but people go there thinking about Cubans. You know what I'm saying? Or any other city. But I think in LA, people think this is Mexican. This is going to be mostly Mexican people.
So, Sandy, someone from, let's say, Cleveland is going to come and visit you in LA. And they say, hey, I want to get to know the real LA. Can you take me around and show me the real LA? Where would you take them?
Oh, boy. I would probably take them to Venice, honestly, or the area around there, because a lot of the issues that Los Angeles deals with in a whole, the income disparity, the racial, demographics changing, problems like homelessness and things like that, you can see that. And I don't mean Venice Beach, like the boardwalk. I mean in that community, though, because I think that has a lot of the elements that you see in other places. They always, when people do come to visit me and they come to the Valley, and I live in Northridge, like we're 3 exits from Simi Valley, but it's not what they expected, because they do come thinking of LA as this is a Latino city, or a Mexican city is what they think. There are a lot of Mexicans there. And then they get out to our block, which is very, very diverse, but not, it's got a lot of mixed families. It's got a lot of, I think what I love most now, in fact, about Los Angeles is how it evolved, is that the boundaries are blurring. In my children's generation, when they, would bring home a friend, and I say, oh, she's so interesting. What is she? She looks so interesting. And they're like, what do you mean? She's, like she's Guatemalan and Jewish, or she's, Korean and German, or she's whatever. There's a lot of, it's not static. And I think, so I would find a place that is moving. And I think that'd be Venice.
So no Disneyland?
No, because Venice has the beach, it has the beautiful things, and it has the, you've got panhandlers, you've got people living in little tiny houses and people knocking them down and building big houses. So I think it kind of reflects the tensions in LA and the beauty and the evolution.
So do you find that you do most of your writing at home, at the LA Times building? Where?
That's a good question. It's pretty much both. Being downtown to me is still a marvel. I tell you, I've been working downtown for all this time. When I walk out at night and see a downtown that is unlike anything I ever could have imagined 30 years ago, it's still unsettling to me when I walk out every night. But so I like to be down there because there's a lot of energy. But it's also so young and so hip. So I probably do most of my writing at home in my pajamas with my roses outside and
Yeah,
my dogs.
that's not hip,
No.
being in your pajamas.
No,
Oh,
but
maybe it
it's
is. I don't know.
comfortable. And this is a very comfortable city. It's really easy to be comfortable, I think, wherever you are, and I like that. For me, it's my neighborhood.
So Don, I forgot. Did you say you're an Angeleno or not?
I'm an Angeleno by desire, indeed. I am an Angeleno.
Okay. Lakewood. It is many students don't know it, but to me, there's the whole thing about the Lakewood plan that people
Yes.
talk about, but it's the quintessential suburb of Los Angeles.
It's Lakewood, developed between 1950 and 1953. 17,000 houses built all at once, mainly for young men and women who had gone through the war years. Many of the young men were veterans. At its inception in 1954 as a municipality, it was 99.99% Anglo, and those few who were not Anglo were claimed that they were Spanish rather than Latino or Hispanic. Today, of course, Lakewood is not like that. Lakewood is as mixed in its colors and ethnicities and cultural backgrounds as the whole of LA County. In fact, if you sort of match up Lakewood with LA County wide demographic numbers, you'll see a very close match. Lakewood is about somewhat more Anglo. It's about 40% non-Hispanic white. It's about 30% Latino or Hispanic of any race. It's about 9% African American, and the largest growing segment is Asian, about 16% Asian.
That is almost remarkable. That's almost LA County
Almost
stats.
LA County by definition, exactly.
Yeah.
So a place that was all white and designed for working class men and women, many of whom were from the border south, from Tennessee and West Texas and East Texas and Southern Illinois and Kansas, who bought those houses in 1950 as sort of a blessing, the gift that the government gave them through the GI Bill to have a home. Those houses are still there, not torn down, pretty much the same as they were when I was a kid growing up in Lakewood, except the people who live in them are telling their suburban stories in all sorts of languages: Hmong, Korean, Chinese, Spanglish, English, and also with the dialects of El Salvador and Guatemala and Colombia and Peru and all those other places as well.
So when you write, what inspires you to write? How do you decide what to write about?
Oh, gosh. The purpose of my writing going back to the early 1990s, and I've been allowed to write for the LA Times under many different regimes at the Times and for other publications. The purpose of my writing is pretty simple. I want people, this may sound very old-fashioned to you, because it sort of sounds like the old-timey booster literature. I want people to fall in love with this place. And more than that, or in addition to that, or an extension of that, I want people to find reasons to be loyal to this place. Because I think disloyalty to the place where you are is one of the prerequisites for a lot of failed public policy, a lot of failures in how we provide for those needs, concerns, crises in our communities. And so I'm a writer who sounds like a pundit, but who thinks not as well as Luis does, but who tries to think like a poet.
But what do you mean by loyal? How does loyalty manifest itself, and why is that an issue for you? How do you see disloyalty?
Well, Sandy mentioned the desire of Valley residents to secede from the city of Los Angeles and to set up their own little autocracy of whiteness or non-brownness. Mm-hmm. 15 years ago or so, and that is a symbol to me of disloyalty to the civic problem that Los Angeles presents. Los Angeles is a problem, and it needs solutions. And one of the solutions I think it needs is loyalty to the place as an institution, not simply as a collection of disconnected neighborhoods where there's little shared imagination about where the city should be going and how it should be working. And there are lots of reasons for why that is the case in Los Angeles, going back to at least the turn of the 20th century. And we can get into that in more detail if you like. But it seems to me that an imagination broad enough to deal with this whole kind of tragic, humanizing, humane, strange agglomeration of things we call Los Angeles, that an imagination that would encompass that might develop certain loyalties to the place as an institution and to each other.
Mm-hmm. Can I piggyback on that? Just Andy. Because, too, that's a really, when you ask about why you write, and I think that what I try to do in my column is kind of recognize that we are a bunch of disparate neighborhoods who really don't always know very much about people right across town or in another part. So I try to introduce people to each other and give a voice to, there are people that have never known foster kids, say, or there are people that don't know, they just don't know how other people live. They don't know, there are people in my neighborhood that, never go downtown. They don't know Skid Row. I had a friend that got assigned to do some work in Compton and was afraid because she's only been in the Valley, and asked me to drive her around down there, and so we did. We drove around, and she was like, wow, this is kind of just like us, maybe, a little more crowded. But I think that writing is, if you can help connect, show that these people, they may not be your same income, your same color, your same language, but they have the same kind of needs and desires and wishes and dreams as you do.
You
So
know,
some of our writing has to be to connect each other through our humanity, our shared humanity.
to answer your earlier question about how would you introduce a stranger, a foreigner
From Cleveland.
from Cleveland or Poughkeepsie, or in my case from New York City, my parents were from New York City, how I would introduce them to Los Angeles, I just rip out any large chunk of Jonathan Gould's restaurant reviews, and I would drive them around from restaurant to restaurant, filling them up with the flavors and smells and encounters that Jonathan Gould finds in the hole-in-the-wall restaurants all over Los Angeles County. You want to teach someone about LA and what it means to be an Angeleno, feed them from the many restaurants and food trucks and carts of Los Angeles.
Let me just add one thing about that. I still think people don't get it. I remember when they did that movie Echo Park, I was living in Chicago, and I lived in Echo Park, and it was still barrio. And I remember...
Oh, remind the students, how many Echo Park was how many years ago?
Yeah, this is in 1980 when I lived there, and it
Okay,
was
so
still barrio. It was
Luis,
getting
most of
gentrified.
our students weren't even born in 1980, so we're gonna have to
Yeah.
remind them about
So-
that movie.
The movie came out, I don't even remember, but I was living in Chicago. It came out early 90s maybe. But anyway, I thought, oh, good, they're going to have my people. There was not one Mexican in that whole movie. But the Mexicans were around. They talked about them. They were unseen and everywhere. You understand what I'm saying? So it's kind of like they still don't get it. Hollywood
But
is one
that's
of,
Hollywood, right?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's the worst part of it because
Yeah.
Hollywood doesn't get it. I worked at Fox Studios for a short time, and I was working on an unnamed film, a TV show about Chicano gangs, and I hated it, and I told them, and I was a script consultant, I was telling them, BS. I was telling them, don't do this. They wouldn't get it, but you know why? Because they had all these people from New York City thinking that they knew the Chicano community, and I go, you're ridiculous. Can I go to New York City and write about Brooklyn? I can't. You have to be from there. You understand? You have to be from LA to get it. And they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't bring in people who knew they knew. And so Hollywood is a good example of people who write and miss it. And I think that's what I see. A lot of people missing it. All the great books, you can think of all the great writers from LA, and then you forget there's a Wanda Coleman. You forget there's Maricela Norte. You forget there's all these writers who've been writing and telling the story, and they're not being heard. So I do think there's an issue with that.
Well, we don't forget Wanda Coleman. She was a professor here at Loyola Marymount University for a while. But, you know, in a sense, the most foreign people, the most immigrant, segregated people is Hollywood, in the sense that they almost, they live here, but they don't understand Los Angeles. And we continue, you know, everybody says we're a company town, that we're Hollywood. And that's never, you know, when you think about company towns, it's a very, that company or that sector is very ingrained in the entire town. Hollywood is very separate from the rest of Los Angeles. And is there a solution to that from what you've seen?
We got to take over Hollywood. You know, I mean, I love this idea about we're not a company town because I worked, you know, people don't know that LA is the largest manufacturing center in the country.
That's right.
I worked in the steel mills when it was here. I worked in the auto plants. I worked in, I thought it was me. I worked in all those places when they were here, and that's why people settled in East LA and South Central to work in
that's
all
right.
that industry. They weren't getting paid much, but that's why they came. When the industry left in the 80s, people didn't know how the impact, the thousands of jobs that were lost, the whole families that were left abandoned, which is why the gangs grew bigger, why drugs became an economic life. People don't get there's objective reasons for this. It wasn't because they're all bad people, they're all messed up. There was a whole life taken away from them because people thought LA was just Disneyland and Hollywood, and it wasn't. It was steel mills, it was warehouses, and they're still there, but nowhere near what it used to be.
Well, I mean, I always talk about the off the 5 freeway in Commerce, the Citadel, which is a mall now. That used to be a Uniroyal tire plant. They used to produce 1 million tires. Behind that beautiful facade, the average worker could, without a college degree, and maybe without a high school degree, could afford to buy the medium-priced home in Los Angeles.
But that's why people came.
Today, they actually employ more people behind that facade, but it's at the service, and they can't afford the medium-price rental unit. And so that's the big transition.
That's right.
And that's the crushing reality of the not quite middle class life in Los Angeles County, is that once upon a time it was possible for a man with a high school education to get a job somewhere, riveting jets together at Douglas, or cracking crude oil at the refineries in Wilmington, or working at the Uniroyal plant, or the GM plant, or any one of the hundreds of other smaller industrial facilities in Los Angeles, and now you can't. Now you can't do that. Even in Lakewood, which has had for many years a relatively low entry cost to own and keep a house relative to the higher costs in the region, requires a two-income family to live there. And that has had tremendous impacts on the social capital that's available to community building and many other things.
That's right, a major, major issue facing Los Angeles. Sandy, how do you describe your column?
Oh, dear.
In
Well,
240 characters or
No,
less.
no, I would just, I mean, I aim to present voices talking about sharing personal experiences that we can all relate to because there are universal elements. So it really is to give voice to people that we might not hear from, and I try to write it in a way that we can connect. It really is just, I think it's a
And so how
connection.
do you choose your topic? So let's say, what was your latest column on?
Well, last week I wrote on Chief Beck, and I wrote on the LAPD coming down on Waze, while at the same time they were entertaining, Mexican mafia kingpin, on the taxpayer's dime. So, now I write about, I know if I'm upset about something bothers me, it bothers somebody else out there too. And even though it may not be, we may not be playing it a lot in the news, I write about what affects me. The week before that, I think I wrote about my dog got sick and I had to spend the night in the emergency room and how scary that was. So it's kind of personal stuff. I just think if we can all, and I hear from a lot of people. I hear from a lot of older people who don't know any black people. They never have, and they ask me questions that they feel that they have always wanted to ask, but they didn't have anybody to
There's
ask.
that column from Ask a Mexican, and so
Yeah,
what is your
well,
yours?
right.
Ask a black woman.
But they're really, I mean, it really has made me realize how awkward it is.
But when I read your column, if I didn't know who you were, or maybe we should take your picture off the column,
Yeah.
because it doesn't. Do you find yourself speaking as an African American?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what that means. I speak, I'm me, and yes, I'm a black woman, and I'm me, and that's who I speak as.
But would you be
it's
offended if
interesting.
I said when I read that column, most of the time it doesn't come across from a perspective of a.
I wouldn't be offended, but I would then ask you, what do you think the black perspective has to be? Because that's the other thing that I think Los Angeles gives you an opportunity to reinvent yourself and to be, to embrace so many things that are maybe outside of what you're supposed to be and embrace. And so, I don't think I'm not the black voice. I'm not speaking for all black people. I'm speaking for me, and I see things a certain way because I'm black, because of what I've experienced, and I can write about, for instance, the whole thing about, being stopped, Black Lives Matter and being harassed when you're black, and it got me thinking, I don't know a single black man of my age, and I'm talking from my college professor brother to, Bobo down at the garage, who hasn't been stopped at some point. Improperly, unnecessarily, and treated rudely. Now, that's an experience that I don't know a lot of middle-class white men have had that. And so that's something I can speak of. That's not a black thing, it's just that in my experience, and mine's just a pretty, middle-class black experience, that happens a lot. But I think we, when my picture was on there, when they first started the comment, my picture was on it, and I still had people that didn't know I was black, because you see what you expect to see. And it got me thinking. I realized there were regular readers that I talked to. There was one in particular.
We're going to say we're colorblind now.
Well, no, but I just think you see what you expect to see. My brother had a buddy who was married to a black woman. He was from Chicago. He talked like he was black. He had kind of curly hair. And I always thought he was black, and I probably told a bunch of jokes I shouldn't have told, and then later found out he was Jewish, and he was raised in Chicago around black people. So it's like, I think that we just see what we expect to see.
But they think that Steve Lopez is Mexican.
Yeah, right, exactly. People always
I'll tell you, I ain't. I'm a white guy.
I don't speak Spanish. I don't know it. Yeah, that's right. I think people just, and I think if I can kind of shake up some of that, complacency or what we think we know, that's
But,
doing
but
it
is there
good.
pressure on you as a black columnist in one of the major dailies to take on certain stories, or pressures from the community to say, hey, Sandy, why aren't you writing about this? I haven't seen you write about X. And, our community needs someone to do that. And the pressure's on you.
Yeah, there is some. There's mostly pressure I put on myself, but I also think, you know, people in the community could want me to write about X, but I may not feel the same way they feel about X, because, there is no one shared collective black people view. We don't get together and take a vote on these things. So, they can sometimes want me to write on it, and they, then regret it when I do, but I think I think you can't help but be, and I think any outlier people can't help but feel, and I mean, I don't know, you tell me if you do this, every time there's some big horrible crime, my first thought is, God, I hope a black person didn't do it. I think there's just an outlier
So
perspective.
you hope it was a Mexican? Or,
No, I hope it was. I hope it was. Well, no, this would be really cruel, so I won't say that. But I'm just really glad when there's some big crime in it, and it's just a regular.
Yeah, like the Oklahoma City bombing or something like that.
Because you can bet every time there is some other one, I get a lot of, I guess, and that's the downside of it, of this column and writing as a black person, that I get a lot of pushback from people who are just racist and vile. And I have to remind myself that is this really small, narrow band of people that have no lives and nothing else to do. And try to keep focused on they're not, they're pathetic, and I'm not going to respond to them. But it does remind. My daughters always say, do they wonder, because they read the comments, the online comments on the paper, and they can be pretty bad. And they say it makes you wonder: is this just a small, very vocal group, or is the guy standing next to you in the elevator one of these guys? Because they're everywhere, and you just don't know. So it's.
Yeah, I would say it's a small group by our surveys.
I would- good.
I'm a
Thank you
social,
for that.
I'm a social scientist, and look at the hard numbers, and survey after survey that we've done. I think Angelenos are incredibly optimistic. They're incredibly more and more comfortable
Yeah.
with the diversity that exists, and it's very different. But I do, as a social scientist, I do want to challenge you about there is a black voice. There is a black perspective when it comes to politics. When you see that 97% of African Americans vote a certain way, that when we do public opinion polls, that African Americans are very unified in certain political perspectives. And so there is such a thing as a black position in politics.
In
at least.
politics, but I think that also reflects, we have had a very collective history in this country, that it didn't, just being black in this country and going back 200 years, we've had a collective history. So there are issues where things are collectively important to us. But I think when it comes to, say, how you should there are a lot of people that think, a lot of black people that think Obama's not nearly black enough, and they're very disappointed.
What do you think?
I think he is. I'm very proud of him, and I still get amazed to wake up and realize there's a black man that's president. So I think he's done. As he said, I'm not the president of Black America. I'm the president of America. But when he can say, like in the Trayvon case, when he can say that could have been my son, or when Eric Holder can say after, I think it was after Michael Brown, that I got chased down the street by cops. I think that takes us to a whole different level. That alone is valuable in a way that might not show up on a social science thing.
Right.
But it's, to me, that's really important.
Luis, how did you come to be appointed Poet Laureate of Los Angeles?
I did a lot of poetry. I wanted to show people some of my books. I have 15 books. In other words, I have 40 years of developing my writing. People remember me from Always Running, which is good, but that's not my
Yeah, I'm
best
sorry, but
book.
that's what I always remember you
Everybody
from.
knows me. And then I also publish book. I publish a very culturally diverse poetry press. It's called Tia Chucha Press. It's an LA press. People don't know that we have it. We're internationally known. And here it's in LA, and people don't even know it. Look how beautifully they're designed. Puerto Rican, African American, Korean American. In other words, Chicano, we publish everybody. So people don't know that this is
And
the
by
work
the way,
that
I
I'm
asked
in.
Luis to, as a favor for him to bring some of his books in case any of you were
Yeah,
interested in
we'll sell 'em out
purchasing.
there.
And so right afterwards, we're going to let some of you peruse those. And,
So I
and
think
see,
I got selected. I don't want to say that because I got selected.
Was there an
because I have-
application, online
Oh, yeah, yeah. You had to
application?
do an application. There was a nomination group that put 4 nominees in front of Eric Garcetti, and he called me personally to say that of all of them, I was the one he was going to pick. So I'm very honored. And but in other words, I worked my way there. I worked very hard to do poetry and
Do
to
you get
it
paid?
in a good well. Well,
What's so funny, Don? It's
poets
like-
don't get paid very
I
much.
was thinking of local government bureaucrats. They don't get paid very much.
Yeah, poets don't get paid very much. They do have a little bit of money, but it's one of those things where it's a very little bit. But I'm not doing it for the money, obviously.
know, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, so Eric Garcetti, is he Mexican?
He's an Angeleno. He's
Bravo.
Angeleno. He's Mexican.
He's a quintessential Angeleno, isn't he? I mean,
Yeah, I
he's,
think so.
He's half Mexican, half Jewish. He was
Tries to speak in the languages of the communities he
Right,
comes
right.
from. I think Eric Garcetti is probably one of the best mayors we ever had. People hear that from me. I'm very controversial about the issues, though I think he's going to be the greatest. Is he going to do? No. Does he have problems? Yes. Is he going to make mistakes? Yes. But as far as where I think he's going, the direction, I think he's going in a good, strong direction.
but he was raised in the Valley. Now lives. His father was from South L.A. His grandparents from East L.A. His parents now live in West L.A. He now lives in the Central City. And it's just like the guy's got the whole geography covered.
Well, he's becoming Chicano. He doesn't even know it because there's a lot of people now. There's a Vietnamese Mexican girl who says, I'm Chicana all the way. It doesn't. Salvadorians, I know, they're Salvis, they're Salvadorians. They love being guanacos. It's great. But some of them are, I grew up Chicano. I don't know any other way. So it's becoming a fluid thing, not just rigid. Now it's fluid. A lot of people see Chicano as, I'm one of them now.
Yeah. Antonio Villaraigosa.
Well,
Give me a poem. Give me a poem on
I read
Antonio.
a poem to him, not to him, but he was there when he was there about leadership, and he really loved it. I think he's a strong leader. I think he has a lot of strong leadership qualities. I think he's made his life more miserable than it should be. I think he himself has his own problem. And I don't know how far he's going to go, but I think that as mayor, he wasn't as strong as he could have been because a lot of people put a lot behind him and didn't see him do everything.
Did he
should have
disappoint you?
done. He disappointed us, but on the other hand, I also think that
But did you have higher expectations for him than like an Eric Garcetti? Because Eric is a halfer and
that's
he's
a good
second.
question. I think the problem with Villaraigosa is that he really did come from the Chicano movement thing, and so therefore there was a lot put on him. I think Latinos are more disappointed in him than almost any other group. They really felt that he could have done more, and now when you talk to Latinos, the ones I talk to, they all say, he didn't do that good.
Okay, but I'm going to contradict you with my data.
Yeah.
Okay.
Most of them know.
Yeah. Most of the
Most
very
of the
recent
Chicanos
surveys.
I know
yeah.
didn't know him, so.
Yeah.
Well, I want to make the point that though we might talk about the character of Eric Garcetti and Antonio Villaraigosa, we also have to think about how they had to deal with the machinery of civic life and the machinery of government in Los Angeles, which was partially reformed by the revision of the city charter at the end of the 1990s, but still is a very difficult piece of equipment to work properly. And even at that, Villaraigosa and Garcetti, I don't think fully understand what is possible with the new machinery of government in Los Angeles. And that troubles me because eventually someone's got to get it right. There is the possibility of the kind of mayor Los Angeles needs within the current charter, but it's not being worked out properly because there are so many forces from the past that are preventing the city system, the city hall system from working properly.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about this in class, and when you compare the mayor of Los Angeles to the mayor of New York or Chicago, I mean, we say, who's in charge of education in New York and Chicago? The mayor is. In LA, he's not. Who's in charge of transportation in New York and Chicago? The mayor is. In LA, he's not. And so you go down a long list. In a formal sense, it's a very weak position. And so it requires a lot of personality to make some changes. And I think one of the most important mayors was Jimmy Hahn, who prevented secession to some
Precisely.
extent and changed the course of LAPD in terms of some of the things that he did. But precisely for doing those two things, he lost the mayoralty. And to me, he continues to be, I think, a true leader in that sense. Even though of the last 4 mayors, he would probably be, by most accounts, and even in our data, it shows to be the least likable, the one that's always projected as the least effective, et cetera. But he did some two
But
great
I think
things.
what he's saying is right. There's an inheritance that's bad. There's the past overcoming the present.
Indeed.
I think you have to reimagine LA. I think governance in LA has to be reimagined.
Indeed.
It's not working the way it's been set up. It used to work for Yordi.
Yes,
It
of
worked
course.
for
It was
Yordi.
perfectly
He's
set
the
up
only
for
one
him.
it did work
Yeah.
for, probably. But it doesn't work for anybody being mayor now. And that's where I think people have to think about how we're going to change this to fit the real reality.
Okay, well, here's a segue, a very small change, but we have an election in Los Angeles coming up, March 3rd. How many of you knew that? It's always like very few people. Obviously, those in my class know that, but we have an election coming up on March 3rd. We expect turnout to be 12 to 13%.
Yes.
If there's a runoff in any one of these races, we expect turnout to be about 6%. What does that reflect about a city that there's such little engagement in that type of politics? But could it be the fault of the politics? Could it be the fault of the system in terms of what you guys are just talking about? Sandy, when you hear that data, what does it tell you about LA, that 12% turnout is what we're hoping for?
Part of it, I think, does go back to being disconnected, too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, disconnected from the people who are our leaders and from each other. People don't get, like you said, almost nobody knows about this unless you have a hot race going on in your district, and I think there's only one council district that has a really hot race. You just tune out,
Is it too soon after we voted in November,
No,
4 months ago?
we didn't come out very much in November either. I mean, we just.
June, there was,
Yeah,
in
yeah.
June.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what it would take to get this populace engaged, because even with vote by mail and all that, I mean, some of it I think is also, we're big, transportation is one thing we haven't talked about, but that is the elephant in the room, that, people who are struggling to get back and forth to work and to get to the commute on time are not going to take that time to go to the local elementary school and vote. And
Yeah, but I mailed you the ballot.
I know,
It's sitting
exactly.
there.
That-
It already
but we
has a
have to do
stamp on
more
it.
with
All you
that,
got to
yeah.
do is not even 5
Right.
minutes.
But that's going to be I mean, those
Don?
kind of things have to happen more.
Well, just to reiterate what I said earlier, the system going back to the turn of the 20th century was framed in terms of having the fewest number of people engaged in local government.
Progressives, we were talking about
Yes,
in class.
their purpose was to make local government a technocracy. It was to be run by the engineers and the experts, and the white middle class would vote in lockstep to preserve white middle class privilege. And that's how the city was supposed to be set up. And it worked that way, through Mr. Yordi as well into the 1990s, and only just slightly began to break through that technocratic vision of local government with the Reform Charter of 1999. And as I said earlier, the men and women who have their hands on the levers of this civic system still haven't learned fully how to use it.
So on the March 3rd election, there is an Amendment 1 and Amendment 2 to change the elections from their current setup of March and May of the odd year to June and November of the even year, at the same time that we vote for president and governor. What do you think about that?
Try anything. We've reached the point where civic disengagement is so worrisome that I'd try anything to get people involved. The proposal to pay money to vote
I like that one
was
too.
not such a bad idea in light of the dismal.
We're calling
degree.
that here voteria.
Yeah. Well,
But the only thing I would say is that I think still it's people will vote for somebody that really represents their interests. We have a disconnect, I think. It's very important to point out. People don't feel that people are really running for them. Now, I was in Chicago where politics is big a deal. There is engagement, but we don't want that either. There, they control it. There, they want the numbers. They will bring in all kinds of people. They'll bring in busloads of people. But what we really want is people who really are trained properly to run for office, can really represent, not make all the deals. That's not what we got. We got people who kind of move themselves up, so we don't know who they are. And once they're there, they're making all these deals and everything else. And so it's also because blacks and browns were disengaged purposely, because this is a city in which they were left out. And so it's very hard to get, how to say,
Yeah.
the
But
wheel turning
Let
for
me
black and
challenge
brown
you,
people.
not on that last part, because I certainly agree on the last part, but the first part. I would make the argument that in the last election in 2013, with Garcetti versus Gruel, that we had two great candidates. They had great experience. Their educational pedigree for both of them were outstanding. Their experience, I followed Gruel for a couple of times, and what was amazing to me, which I never thought I would see, it was a white woman from the Valley who felt incredibly comfortable in South LA and East LA, and those populations, whoever came to see her, felt incredibly comfortable. And Eric Garcetti as well throughout the city. It was, to me, it was a great campaign from that perspective, okay? But they were so alike, it's true, and that has to do with all kinds of different factors. And so I can't imagine, I know we can define and romanticize what the perfect Superman or Superwoman would be to become mayor, but if you're really honest and direct, I cannot imagine two better candidates running for mayor of
But
LA.
they did so much negative campaigning,
Mm-hmm.
too. I think that's the other thing that, you know, you tune it out after a while, and you don't know. You can like somebody a lot and think they're a great candidate, but if their whole campaign is bashing the other person,
Yeah.
you know, I think that's a big
And
factor.
I still think they still miss whole pockets of
Yeah.
people. So they know who to talk to, they know where to
That's
get,
the
yeah.
likely voter and all that kind of
And
stuff.
so the
right.
people are just not gonna vote unless they know who they are, and they don't really know them.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to mention is the decline in voter participation is not unique to Los Angeles. We're seeing it in New York and Chicago, every single city. It's declining in almost every type of election, except for president. We are actually voting at the same rate for president over the last couple of decades. So that's not declining. It's every other type of an election. That's why Amendment 1 and Amendment 2, which, full disclosure, I'm actually the author of Amendment 1 and Amendment 2 and have written the argument for it.
The commercial,
Yeah,
I
there's a
hear.
commercial.
he wants you to vote.
Be sure to vote on
yeah,
March
yeah.
the 3rd.
You forgot vote yes, not just vote.
I'm sorry, vote yes.
Yeah.
Your grade is not dependent upon your vote.
All right. But the idea, it's not a panacea though. It's not. No, it's just a way to start moving it. And what I worry about it though, one of the arguments against it that I do think is important is that are we really creating more civic engagement by moving that? And will the local discussion be lost within the broader national or statewide discussion? And I'm saying, well, there's very little discussion going on right now. Look, right now, it's not
I
happening.
tell you something else too, man. I don't know about you guys, but I'm tired of big money in politics. I'm just tired of it.
yeah.
I can't get engaged. It just removes me completely. There's so much big corporate, personal, whatever money, and you know what? You just feel it's just not yours anymore. And I think that's what's missing, the idea that maybe we do need public financing. Maybe we should equalize everybody so that everybody's voice can be heard. Even though, unfortunately, the media goes along with the big money. They should be the voice of whoever's running, let's put them out there, but they end up going,
Yeah,
well,
but the
who's
Supreme Court's
likely
decided
candidate?
that already. I mean, it's
But you see what I'm saying? I
Yeah.
think that's why people are getting to the point where they're saying, I'm tired. They're getting tired in Chicago, getting tired because it's just so big money.
There's something terribly wrong when non-local dollars, I think the number I read was $400,000, maybe it was $600,000, poured into the Irvine City Council race by outside money to change the political character of that city council from Democratic to Republican. I have no beef about changing the council majorities, but $600,000 or $400,000 spent in a medium-sized city's election for that purpose, outside money, that's very disturbing.
Feels like you're being manipulated, and that's what turns us off.
We are at Loyola Marymount University having a discussion about what it means to be an Angeleno with Sandy Banks of the Los Angeles Times, Luis Rodriguez, Poet Laureate of Los Angeles, and DJ Waldie, SAS, and all-around Lakewood resident. 1965, Watts riots, 50 years ago. 1992, the LA riots or Rodney King riots, et cetera. About every 25 years or so. Are we going to have another riot in LA soon?
Well, I want to say that people forget the 1970 East LA riot. And
Yeah.
people keep forgetting that, and it was millions of dollars lost. It was people killed and people arrested. I don't know why we keep forgetting about that. It's part of the trajectory. LA is riot city. more civil disturbances in this city than
So,
any other
right,
city
so
in
you're
the
expecting
country.
another one soon?
Well, I
It's like
don't-
predicting earthquakes. When's the next earthquake as well?
Well, I guess because it's a cultural, political, social earthquake that we're going to have. It may not take that form because I get the sense that people are rioting all the time in LA, only they're not considering it. It got concentrated in 92, got concentrated in 1970, got concentrated in 65. But I think overall, there's people constantly in that mode. Now,
But how does that manifest
well,
itself?
here's what I think the cynical thing happened. Let's get rid of some of these people. Somebody made this decision. I know it's such a who did it, but there was a plan that I saw, a plan for Watts, in which they purposely said we're going to get rid of black people. That plan was considered, was done, and they actually have done it. In other words, there's been people thinking the way we're going to stop riots is get rid of people. They've got rid of so many communities, Highland Park, Echo Park, South Central, so many communities have been dispersed, taken out. We're not keeping communities intact. We're not keeping them, giving the resources they need. They're bringing in money. You know, and even downtown, I used to live, I had a room on the Eastern Columbia building in 1980, right there on Broadway for $60 a month. Now they're $1 million lofts. So to me, this is the ongoing rioting. People looking at this and say, well, somebody is displacing us. This is the riot nobody wants to talk about, the big money riot. You know what I'm saying? The ones that come in there and just push people out. Where are we talking about that rioting versus the poor people rioting, who is just them so frustrated they can't go any further and they get clamped down. But the rioting that I'm talking about is that ongoing money being used to throw people out. Go to San Francisco, beautiful, great city. Only people with money can live there, practically. So I think that's the kind of writing I'd like to address.
We might also want to remember that tens of thousands of young men were taken out of those communities too and put into prisons during this period, which also had a kind of
60% of the California prison system comes from LA County.
And we are, what, about a third of the population? So it's double the presentation. Sandy, you recently wrote one on Proposition 47, and you basically were saying maybe it was a mistake. Explain to the students Proposition 47 very quickly, and then what your column was about.
Proposition 47 reduced the penalties for drug possession of essentially any drug, and for crimes where what was stolen was less than $900. So breaking into a car and stealing something, a petty theft, anything, those are also typically the crimes that drug users do to support themselves. And the idea was that we should not keep putting drug users in jail. That's taking up space that we could have, real criminals in, and we would save money by keeping them on the streets and using the money we would have spent to incarcerate them to provide drug treatment programs. And it's a lovely idea, and California passed it with like 67% of the vote. But the problem is now, a lot of those petty crimes are spiking in a lot of neighborhoods. And the people with drug problems aren't getting help because there isn't help there yet. So, there's just a question. It's one of these things. And what's been fascinating for me in writing about it was you hear from the policy people and the academic people and the advocates for it saying, well, this is a collective and a societal decision, and yes, some drug addicts are going to be out there and they're going to break into your home, but that's just too bad because we're doing something that's going to make us a better, healthier state in the long run and is more humane and is going to keep all these people from having criminal records. And so that's the collective thing, but what you see on the streets are people in some of these poor working class neighborhoods saying, my car keeps getting broken into now, or my purse got stolen. And what a lot of people have raised, and this is another income disparity, is it's a felony if it's over $950. It's a misdemeanor if it's less than. So you have the Beverly Hills lady with her big, Louis Vuitton bag and her very expensive iPhone, and she gets her purse stolen, and that's a felony, and you're going to prison. But you get the cleaning lady who just left her job, and all she has is that $60 in that little purse that she got at a thrift store, and you steal her purse, and it's all the money she has, and that's a misdemeanor. So there, it shows again how complicated. I mean, that's a law that was passed by initiative. Somebody drafted it up with a specific agenda, and we voted for it because we liked most of what was in it. I voted for it too, and I voted for it because on principle, I think drug addicts need treatment, not jail. But I also do not want them breaking into my home. So I think that we need to provide treatment. I think now it was kind of backwards. I think we should not have criminalized, have essentially decriminalized the thefts. And, there is also, the other downside for drug addicts is, I heard from many drug addicts who say, I'm clean now because when I got arrested, they gave me the option of going to drug court or going to treatment, and so I'm better now. If there's no penalty for me, if every time I, smoke meth, I get a ticket, I'm going to keep doing it. So, it's a lot more complicated. And this is where I think our legislators fall down on the job. These are the kind of things that should be hammered out by people who are looking at all the angles and not be crafted by a group that has one, agenda. And we're just saying, hey, that sounds really good. And the details don't necessarily suit the purpose. So I don't
Again,
know.
you're talking about the initiative process.
Yeah, the initiative
a
process.
progressive
California is the
idea.
only state that has something like that. Yeah, that works. So you get enough signatures, you get it on the ballot, and boom, it's law. And now it can't be undone.
Well, with another initiative.
Yeah,
it could-
only with another
Can I
initiative.
just say that I think it is not working as well as it should, but I do think the pendulum swing shouldn't go the other way. 'Cause
Right.
That seems to be what people are saying. Well, let's go back to putting them in prison.
No,
I
it's
do agree
get
with
the health,
Sandy.
Yeah.
That's where we're at now, and I think that's where the effort has to be, because there was still $10 billion in that prison system. They didn't really lose that money.
Right.
Where's the money coming from? Well, the prison system should be completely curtailed, because most of those people don't need to be in prison. I don't know if you understand that. Most people do not. But if you're going to do that, you got to take that money from that prison system and put it in the community, and that is being blocked.
And that's what
There's a
was
lot
not
of
done, right.
lobbying
And
to
that's
make
when
sure
it's
that
going to
doesn't
see, because
happen.
they say, oh, give us a couple years and it will be happening. And I think we need to hold their feet to the fire
Right,
on that.
absolutely.
What's your next column?
I'm writing about it's Valentine's Day. It's a lady who has Valentine making parties at her house, okay? So it's not a big deal. But it was very nice. It was in Venice, and the theme of it is kind of how, rituals over the years keep us closer, and she has her husband there, her ex-husband and her ex-boyfriend, at the table.
Now it's getting interesting. At first I said, I'm not going to read that
won't
column. I'm
read
going to
it.
skip that one, but now.
And quite often, I never meant, even like the Prop 47 one, I was going to write a simple, straightforward thing, but the more you dig and the more questions you ask, the more complicated you see it is. And that's fascinating to me.
So is there a story you've been meaning to write, but you just keep putting it off?
Yeah, there's a lot. I tell you, the one I would love to write right now is, okay, we've outlawed suspensions for willful defiance in LA Unified Schools. What are we doing instead? And what is happening to those people who would be being suspended? We hear a lot about they're just calling it something else, or they're sending them into a room to kill time. But what are we doing? Because some of those suspensions are kids that need help. They're behind in class, or they're angry about something, and they need help. So that's what I want to write. But it's a hard one, to pick off a little piece of.
What are you working on right now, Don?
Right now, I'm working on a book for Princeton University Press, tied into an essay I wrote for Design Observer magazine. So I'm trying to write about suburbs again, writing about how suburbs mean and how we understand them. And the working title is is Suburban Poetics. So it's not Prop 47, but it is a way of talking about how we share our lives together.
Yeah, but what is the biggest difference between a modern suburb in LA County today and 50 years ago?
Well, the primary difference between the mass-produced tract house suburb of 1950 and an existing suburb today, as opposed to a brand new suburb, is demographics, and the notion that though we might use the word, as you have, to describe Los Angeles County as Latino, or the city of Los Angeles as Latino, the word that always comes to mind for me is mestizo. It's the progress of mestizaje, and it's the place where things get mixed and mingled and transformed by their interactions. A difficult and oftentimes uncomfortable process, but that's what I think is underway. And what keeps me in Lakewood, besides the fact that I'm a barnacle and I don't get around much.
What did you call yourself?
A barnacle.
Oh,
A barnacle.
Did you watch a SpongeBob movie this weekend, or?
No, but I used to watch it on television. What keeps me in Lakewood is to find out what happens next. What happens next to these new narrators of suburban stories? What happens next to my Korean and Hmong Cambodian and Latino and Salvadoreño and Guatemalan neighbors. What happens next to them? I want to see what happens next.
So, but what do you say to people like Luis who kind of lament the changing communities, the gentrification? There's a part of me that, I grew up in Highland Park. I want to go back to Highland Park, and I want it to be exactly like it was when I was growing up. However, I don't want to live there when I
Yeah.
was growing up. I live here in Westchester, or some of my students call it Whitechester. And so I struggle with that because I don't mind seeing it being improved or what have you. But LA and every neighborhood's a constant change. But some of us, some more than others, want to have it stay the way it was.
I'm lucky I don't have to be nostalgic because I live in the same place I grew up. I don't have to think about it.
Literally the same place.
Literally the same house my parents bought in 1946. And what's interesting about it...
Same bedroom? Same.
No, I changed the bedroom.
To the bigger bedroom.
The
yeah.
better one, yeah, better bedroom. There's only 3. It's a 900 square foot house. The point I'm trying to make, though, is that Lakewood, thank goodness, will never be gentrified. You're never going to turn those 950 square foot houses, 1,000 square foot houses, into anything more than they are. And city council members had the good sense 15 years ago, 12 years ago, to pass a real anti-mansionization ordinance. And so you can build, a second story on your Lakewood house, but you can't tear it down and build these god-awful Gothic horrors that you see being built all over Southeast LA County.
Well, plus I have to clarify, I don't want it to go back to where it was. I'm saying
Yeah.
keep the communities intact, bring the resources there. There was streets in East LA that were not paved. They paved them when the Asians started coming in from, not from Asians here, from other countries. So in other words, keep the people there, give them the resources, let them build their communities, don't throw them out.
But
give
capitalism
them what
doesn't
they
work
need.
that way.
There you go.
We're in a capitalist society.
It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way. There's a new way to have to refinance it, therefore up
Well,
the
there's also
value
an
and all that.
imagination
Not that
you
I'm
gotta
saying,
have.
well,
You gotta
true.
have for a whole new imagination. You gotta imagine communities that are healthy, that are intact, that everybody can have, and not this hierarchy that we're living in, that it's been hurting us. We have to reimagine another way to live. We cannot keep living with a hierarchy coming down and big money deciding what things are gonna be or not be. That, to me, is what we're...
So have Latinos being elected to many public offices now, are they changing that? I mean, 30 years ago when I got here to Loyola Marymount as a professor of Chicano studies, I would make the argument that once we started electing Latinos, things were going to be so different. Now I make the argument that every time we elect Latinos, it's no different.
Well, that's what a lot of my neighbors and friends say that. That we fought very hard to get Latinos in office. And most of them felt like, what did they do? Now, I will say one thing. Vieira Goza made a difference. He did. Now, one of the things that he made a difference is he was the first one to consider gang intervention as part of a whole public safety program. That was innovative.
And that's
that
made a
was
huge
important.
difference,
He made a big difference, and people don't recognize how important that was. Now, unfortunately, and maybe it was out of his hands, law enforcement still controlled it. But the idea was important. Now we have to take it further. So I think Latinos have made a difference. I think Obama's made a difference, but at the same time, I think they're limited by the very nature of the beast that they're in.
So, Sandy, I'm very impressed with the black political class in Los Angeles. I think it is more powerful in Los Angeles than any other city in that they are more than twice proportionally overrepresented. That when you take a look at the population of African Americans in Los Angeles, 10%. Blacks hold 20% of the city council seats.
And what good is that doing? I mean, I don't think, I would not say they're impressive.
At least at the quantitative
Yeah,
number.
well,
I mean, that
yeah,
blacks,
they like being in law, they like hearing themselves talk, they like being in office. But I don't, I mean, it takes Sheila Kuehl getting on the Board of Supervisors to do something about foster care, which, black children are the lion's share of kids in foster care. So, I mean, I don't know. I just don't think much of the black leadership in this city. And I don't think there is much, compared to cities like San Francisco, there's just not much, or Oakland, particularly Oakland, there's just not much cohesiveness or not much of a sense of connection between those leaders and the actual people.
So could we say that about every type of leader in Los Angeles? Is there a disconnection between leaders no matter what community?
No, I don't know. No, my councilman in Northridge, Mitchell Englander, he's very connected to most of the people, and I mean, we may not. He's not my cup
The
of tea.
only Republican on the city
Yes,
council.
exactly.
Yeah.
And he's very, I mean, so I don't know. I don't know if that's same, but I would just say I mean, if you're asking me, I am not impressed with I think the black leadership does not serve much of a function. I mean, when you talk about Villaraigosa, for instance, you can say all these things that he did, and he did. He brought emphasis on transit, and he tried to take over the schools. He tried to do things like that. I don't see for all the, power we have, that it's out of proportion to our numbers, that we're getting any better.
Tom Bradley.
Yeah, I think Tom Bradley made a huge difference, I think, then. But now we've gone backwards, and, a lot of it has to do with what you talked about, the economic issues.
Exactly.
And the factories. But I don't see anywhere, I think we need to stop looking for a leader and just figure out who has our interests, in mind, and that's who we support. And it wouldn't matter what color they are at this point.
But how do we define what our interests are? I mean,
We want same thing for everybody. We want our neighborhoods to have safe streets, good schools, decent jobs, the conveniences, places to shop and places to, get a cup of coffee and, nice parks. I mean, we want the same thing everybody else does. When I look at it, things like in my neighborhood in the valley, there are 5 parks, lovely parks with community centers within 3 miles of my house. When I go down and I'm in South LA covering, I can drive an entire day and you won't see, though, you see one big park where everybody's supposed to be at. It's, the resources are not evenly divided, and until those black politicians try to do something about that, they're.
yeah. So let me refer you to this little brochure that we passed out that has some of our findings about being an Angeleno. In the second to the last page, they're not paginated. My apologies about that. And the question is, are we going in the right direction or wrong direction? Okay. And we have the first column is the LA region, then followed by the city and followed by the neighborhood. And you'll see a pattern that the closer you get to home, the more people feel you're going in the right direction. So that you had as high as 84% of Asians believed their neighborhood was going in the right direction. And 68% of African Americans, where only 56% thought that the region was going in the right direction. When people get close to the neighborhood, they're really invested in that, and they believe it's going in the right direction. By the way, we have done at the Center for the Study of Los Angeles at Loyola Marymount University over 20 surveys in the last 15 years or so, and we ask this question all the time. And while the numbers collectively go up and down, they never change the order, meaning that people always say that their neighborhood, to a much greater degree than the region or the city, is going in the right direction. Now, there's a lot of good answers for that. Well, what's your interpretation of that?
When we do that for education, too, they can say they think education in LA is horrible, but when you ask them about their school, they think
And their
their
teacher,
school is
they
great,
love-
and their teacher,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's always, we see we're more familiar with our thing,
Right.
and so we like it better.
Right, so when you talk to people about their individual experience, they love their neighborhood, okay? They love their elected official. They love, they love Mitch Englander, right?
Right.
They
They
love their
do, yeah.
teacher, they
Yeah,
love their
yeah, they
school,
do.
They hate the city council.
Yeah, they hate the city
But they
council, they
don't-
hate the
yeah.
school
School
district.
district.
What's going on there?
I don't have an answer for that. I'm probably embedded in human psychology to find value in what's near at hand and to be suspicious or uncertain about what's further
You're
away.
trying to justify your existence, you're trying to justify your position that this is a house or neighborhood I live in, so
Well,
I might
there may be something to that. I don't want to psychoanalyze the majority of residents of LA County, but there must be something having to do with validating my own experience. I'm here. I'm not.
You're an
chopping-
essayist, isn't that an
chopping-
essayist supposed to psychoanalyze everybody?
No, I don't say essayists psychoanalyzes themselves, not anybody else. Come on.
And maybe it's the media, to a part, too. Maybe it's the media that you judge what life is like everywhere else by what you see on TV and read in the paper.
But we've
So-
been surveying residents of Lakewood since the early 1980s, and it parallels these results exactly every time we do it. Residents are very satisfied with their neighborhood. They're very satisfied with the services they receive there. They like what's local, and they grow more anxious and disconnected and uncertain the further away from that neighborhood they go.
Yeah, and if you turn the page, the one that really got to me was, if someone was interested in moving to your neighborhood, would you recommend it for the following aspects? And as a place to raise children, 77%. I mean, one of the major complaints is the lack of education and the lack of parks and the lack of amenities for children in Los Angeles that we talk about. Yet 77%, this is 2,400 people that we interviewed. Okay, again, the largest social survey that's being done currently in Los Angeles, and 77% believe that their neighborhood is a good place to raise children. Don't you? I mean, I find these numbers incredibly optimistic and contrary to what my expectation was when we were asking some of these. I thought they were going to be much more pessimistic. Before I kind of get your response to that, I just want to mention to the students that if they want to ask a question in about 2 or 3 minutes, I'm going to be looking for students who need extra credit to ask a question or two. What's your response to these numbers? I mean, my interpretation is much more optimistic than I expected. I would have not hypothesized these high of numbers. Luis, what do you think?
Well, I think there is deep alienation from the rest of the world. I think as things get close and particularized, you can see it, you can touch it, you're tangible.
Right.
But as it gets bigger into the governance,
abstract.
it gets less and less human, less and less meaningful. You get bigger and bigger, and pretty soon, where are you? So I think that reflects some of that because, again, we still have in the county the large number of poor people. Well, where are they? I'm sure some of them are probably saying, my neighborhood's cool, but overall, they think poverty's terrible. You know what I'm saying? So you can look at the big issue and say, this is not right. There shouldn't be poverty. On the other hand, I'm a very poor person, but I like my neighbors.
Right.
So I think that's what it is. It just
I agree with
changes.
that.
Yeah.
Sandy?
And I think this is a neighborly place too. I'm always amazed when I'm out and about reporting that, for all we think about being disconnected, neighborhoods tend to be pretty close. And so yeah, I think you're exactly right that once you get out and you don't know what's going on out there, and also you're holding those other forces responsible for the things you don't like in the city. The things you do like are the fact that, if I forgot to close my garage door, I can call my neighbor and say, hey, would you check my garage door? Somebody's watching. I mean, you feel close.
Yeah. Don?
Well, maybe it comes down to the question of, is Los Angeles too big? When this degree of optimism is shown in a place like Lakewood, it has a political result. People engage the local politics. They back their city council members when they speak and offer projections for the future. They get involved in volunteer activities, and they agree to things like local property tax, local use tax increases or parcel tax increases. But the problem is, what political outcome does this optimism have in Los Angeles? Where does that optimism turn into policy and action? I don't see it happening.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think are the major challenges facing Los Angeles?
Oh, gosh. We've heard them for the last hour and a quarter.
Well, one is we had a terrible economic shift that we haven't even addressed properly.
No. So
And
would you call that like the inequality?
I think the inequality is massive. It's very deep. I think we have to address it. I think there's an issue of health. I think the city is very unhealthy. People may not think so all the time, but I think it's an unhealthy city. The smog all the way down to water and everything else, I think we have to address how we can be healthy. But I also like to extend healthiness. I think healthiness means that you can walk down the street, that you got your kids in a good school. There should be arts in every neighborhood, festivals, music,
who would
dance.
disagree with you? I mean, when you say that, I would think that
Yeah.
everybody, the 100 students that are
Except
right
for
here.
the policymakers, and all of a
No, I
sudden
don't
there's
think-
no money.
Well, they won't disagree
Yeah,
with you. They
there's
just
no
won't do
money.
it.
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean, for example, the arts in the city is concentrated. It's live ballet, it's Hollywood, it's concentrated, museum role. There should be museums in every neighborhood. There should be festivals and music events. There should be block parties.
I'm not sure I agree with you. There should be museums in every neighborhood. But there should be festivals in every neighborhood.
But kind of a museum. In other words, there should be cultural spaces. There should be
Okay, that's a different-
storefront
yeah.
places. There should be people doing things, and it shouldn't be just concentrated because there's a whole neighborhoods where you can't even get a bookstore. Whole miles and miles you can't
Gosh,
go to
what's a
bookstore.
bookstore?
I know. You can't find one.
Where
gotta-
processed wood products
yeah.
are sold.
So, in other words, I think everything's being moved away, and I think that's part of the inequality. It isn't just income inequality, but it's also cultural inequality, a political inequality that everybody's dealing with.
We are at Loyola Marymount University, and we're actually going to turn it over to the students. Let's see who's got a question.
My name is Anna Alexis Bible. I'm a political science major, African American studies minor. And I have a question. So recently in class, we've been learning about like leadership and how a lot of the times our political leaders don't have much control over what's really going on in the city because there's different departments that are in charge of, public or social services such as like schools and things like that. So I want to know, because there was a moment where we were actually critiquing the mayors and their point of views and kind of, do we view them as successful? And my question to you all is that, do you think we put too much emphasis on change coming from our mayors in LA? Like, is it too much from just coming from a person who's just a political leader who's trying to execute things that he may not or she may not be able to?
So there are major trends impacting every city, major international trends, major national trends, even regional trends, the drought, for instance, and things of that nature. Does a mayor, a county supervisor, have control over those or how they respond to them? And then even if every council member and everybody was supportive of the mayor, does city government have enough power or control to really make a difference in the daily lives of Angelenos facing these major trends, whether it's a recession, a drought, war, national defense spending, and I can go on and on.
Water policy is made by regional agencies, not by the city. Transportation decisions are made with the strong involvement of the mayor, since he has a significant number of seats on the MTA board to appoint, but he doesn't make all the decisions.
Right.
Air quality is not determined by any one mayor; it's determined by the South Coast Air Quality Management Board. And there are dozens of other regionalized aspects of government over which no elected official has very much individual control.
Fragmentation.
So where does decision-making come from? Does it come from Sacramento? Does it come from some new form of regional government, that the kind that Willie Brown had proposed for many years back in the 80s and early 90s? Or does it have to be from the national level? I don't know, but the mayor of Los Angeles, or the mayor of any city in LA County, has very little power to impact many of these issues.
One thing I would say is that if they're going to be running for office, they should not be standing on ceremony. They should do something.
Yeah.
They should want to do something. They should want to push things. They should want to push social energy. They should want to say, this is what I stand for. Fight it out with the city council, fight it out with business community, whatever you got to do. But they should want to say, I want this kind of city, and this is what I'm going to
There should
fight
be more
for.
fireworks at the city council and mayor level.
And they should enlist the communities more. I mean, some of the best changes taking place in LA Unified are being pushed and orchestrated by community groups, by parents who said, this is what we want. And I think if those politicians would work harder on seeing what their community wants and organizing those communities, then that's where the pressure to make change will come from.
So on April 7th, here at Loyola Marymount University, we're going to have a half-day conference called Forecasting LA. We take a look at some major economic trends, using the data, government data, et cetera. We all come very similar to like what the Anderson forecast does, but we supplement that with a survey of 2,400 residents, asking them where they think LA is going. In addition, we want to get some leadership aspects, so we have interviewed over 50 city managers in the LA County area. But we were kind of struggling about the forecast about the future, trying to get young people. So we're trying to identify people under 40 who are going to already making a difference or have the potential to make a difference. Anybody come to mind under 40 in Los Angeles who are either impacting politics, policy, or the civic narrative? They don't have to be directly in politics, but a strong journalist or a poet or somebody under the age of 40 who you could see or project that this is going to be someone who's going to make an impact. Anybody come to mind?
I think they are there, but they're largely unsung. I would say this young woman, Mayra Zaragoza. She's
Mayra
24
Zaragoza.
years old. She's from Pacoima. She's a leader. She runs a youth group called Young Warriors. She was going to CSUN. She's bettering herself. but nobody knows about it. But
Right.
she's making a difference working with the most troubled kids, probation kids, doing things. There's a lot of unsung young people because unless they're in the entertainment industry, they're not going to be known. Entertainment, you can be in 18, 19, become famous overnight, but you can't do that. In
Yeah,
those
but I'm talking
communities.
about even, for instance, someone who, if I was trying to identify 40 people under 40 who are making a difference and that they're incredibly good in their profession, but are impacting LA, I'll tell you somebody who would not be on the list. Clayton Kershaw, the best baseball player in America, right here in Los Angeles. Nobody could be more dominant than him. Incredible philanthropist. He's doing incredible things in Africa and his hometown of Dallas, but he's not impacting LA. Okay? Who can I find who's that important in their sector, but then also making a difference in LA? And maybe I'm selling Clayton Kershaw short. He might be doing some things that I don't know about.
But that's why I think they're unsung. There's Mark
Yeah.
Cuban who works with Get Lit Players, the leading poetry performance group in the city. They work in all the schools. They're getting poetry coming out of young people's lives. Mark Cuban is very
Mark, wait,
important.
I thought he was the owner of the Dallas Mavericks.
Sorry, it's Matt Cuban.
Oh, Matt Cuban.
He is. That guy is Matt Cuban.
I think he's over 40.
So, yeah. So Matt Cuban is one of these young people who nobody knows really, but he's impactful. There's Maida De Valle, who was in Def Jam. She read poetry in front of President Obama. She's famous. She's great, but do people know her?
No,
She
right.
works with street poets. Street poets does similar things. Goes out in the streets, works with young people. They're not being heard. There are people, young people out there, but nobody knows who they are, and yet they're making an impact.
Sandy, anybody at the Times or anywhere?
Yes, we have wonderful, young, hardworking young people that will make a difference, but the only person that I can think of off the top of my head, and I don't remember his name, but he was working with the Community Coalition and organizing around the suspension issue and
Yeah.
some other issue. And, basically, and now I think he works for Garcetti now, I think. And we're going to hear from him, but I can't tell you his name, unfortunately. But yeah, I think this system kind of doesn't let people shine. You have to kind of, pay your dues and put in the work, and then get somebody behind you to endorse you and all that. It's
Yeah,
hard.
but so when I take a look, again, I'm sorry, I'm a political scientist, so I have to harp on politics, but when I take a look at the LA City Council, even the school board, the community college board, the board of supervisors, the congressional delegation, there's nobody under 40.
Well, and if you wanted to, if you're young and you want to run for those offices, you have to raise a huge amount of money. People don't know you, or you have to have an established force behind you.
Sev
So it's
Yaroslavsky was
hard.
26 when he won. Richard
was
Alatorre was
40 years
28.
ago.
Waxman was like in his 20s. It just
But
doesn't.
money didn't drive things as much as it does today.
Don, any?
Boy, I'm sort of racking my brains to find a figure from local government that might fit the bill. And unfortunately, the cohort of people that I know are more my age. We're aging
that's
out
all-
of the
yeah,
system.
yeah,
aging out of
exactly,
the system.
exactly.
Young
Yeah.
panel.
I said we were studying city managers, which is basically the CEO of a city, and of the 88 of them in Los Angeles County, only one is under 40.
Yeah, there's been in the last 25 years a great deal of sticking in place among the city management community in Los Angeles County. A certain amount of moving around within the county, but many of them have been there in their slot for many, many years.
Yeah. I want to end with this. LA institutions, I think Loyola Marymount University is an institution along with some other educational ones that I'm not going to mention. But the Los Angeles Times is an institution. I know my dad would get mad at them and cancel the subscription and then make me go down to the corner store and buy it. But journalism, the press has changed dramatically, and it's changing dramatically. The LA Times got sold one more time. We now have Austin Butner in charge. In 5 years, will there be an LA Times?
I have learned not to look that far ahead, but I can say I think that we are heartened and encouraged now by Austin Butner's his investment in us. I mean, if you notice, we had lost our local news section, which was inconceivable to me as a journalist, and now we have a really robust California section. We're spending money and we're doing things and we're trying to engage with the community. They have a new thing where they're trying to engage with high schools, and they'll have their own little blog where you could post your stuff from your school. So, I feel more encouraged now than if you'd asked me a year ago. I mean, you know, the reality is that things are changing, and I don't think we quite, it seems like every time we get our mind around what we think readers want from a newspaper, something changes. And so, you know, we have to constantly reinvent ourselves too. But, you know, I think the readers want to be engaged, and they want to be challenged, and they want to be entertained, and they want to, you know, understand their community, and I think we're getting better at that.
Yeah. Well, Luis, Sandy, Don, I really want to thank you for taking time out of your day to come and visit with us. Thank you.